Thank you all for continuing to support this beloved community of Mile High Church. I walked into these doors when I was a teenager, and my dad and mom brought me here because they were looking for a place where they where both of their religious identities could coexist. My mom was raised Christian, and my dad was raised Buddhist, and Mile High was a place where both of those identities could exist together. And it was amazing to see once we got here that not just Buddhism and Christianity, but all wisdom traditions and all faith traditions are so deeply honored here. And I was hooked from the beginning. I actually didn't go to teen group once I started coming here. I was ready to come to church and get some spiritual food from the services themselves. And I can remember, coming on Sundays and getting really filled up and feeling inspired and just sort of like dabbling, for a while. But it wasn't until I hit my young adult years and I hit what felt like a spiritual dark night of the soul. I can remember this instance that really defined that moment when I was feeling just really bad about myself and about life. And I had drawn this caricature, like self portrait of myself that just brought to light all of the features that I really didn't like about who I was. And I can remember, like, really vividly, like, writing the words on top of this caricature, like, am I worthy of love? Am I worthy of life? And I sort of, came to the next morning and I saw that picture. And it was this point where I just felt like, wow, like enough is enough. I have to do something about this. And it was on that day that I signed up for my first class here at Mile High Church. And it was through that class where all of the things I had been dabbling in, all those things that I had just sort of gotten little tastes of by tuning in on Sundays, those began to actually take root once I got into class and I began to learn about spiritual principles. I began to understand that all of these qualities that we normally just assign to a divine thing outside of myself, these qualities of love and goodness and beauty and dignity, those were all really embodied here within me. And I can remember at first like having to fight for that. Like I had to fight to believe those things, that those could actually be embodied in me too. And it was this beautiful moment of healing through sort of that fight of saying no. Like there are these stories that I have created about myself and maybe have I've inherited, but they're not the truest truth, right? So I can remember going through that healing and getting through those first classes and like feeling pretty good about myself and feel like, oh wow, I've done all this amazing, deep spiritual work. And then like, a few years later, there comes that little gremlin baby of that self-portrait character like rearing its head again, showing up in like a different situation, right? And I can remember being kind of like taken by that. Like I thought I had done this work already, right? Like I thought I had gone through this already. I thought I had healed this. And it felt like at first that I had like just gone in this circle, but then I realized and I continued to learn that that's not how the spiritual path works, right? It's not a circle, it's a spiral, right? And I was just kind of coming around back to this certain theme in the spiral, but I wasn't the same. And I had gained tools and I had learned some things so that I was actually deepening in this sort of core wound that I had experienced, but a deeper healing was happening. It wasn't the same as before. And it actually became a good sign that I was coming back around to that because it just meant that in my being and in my consciousness, I was ready for some deeper work again, right? So I've been thinking about this and how it relates to what's happening in the world, specifically around the healing of race and racism that is going on within our country and around the world as well. I've heard some folks say, like, I thought we had done this work already, right? Like, I thought we had healed this. Aren't we living in a post racial society? And the fact is, right, when we look at the history of this sickness of racism in our country, we've been coming around on this spiral a few times. Like, let's be real. When our country became free in 1776, right, slavery was still legal. Now, many years later, it became illegal in the northern territories, but it wasn't until we went through an entire civil war, like one of the bloodiest, most devastating wars in our country's history, that slavery was actually abolished. But then, even after that, it wasn't until 2 years later, on June 19th, 1865, where everyone that was formerly enslaved was actually free. And that's the Juneteenth holiday that we just celebrated a couple days ago, right? But then after that, what happened to these Jim Crow laws and segregation and this so-called separate but not equal, and the civil rights movements of the 50s and 60s led by Martin Luther King and inspired by Gandhi, they were fighting for the dignity that was showing up in our voting laws, right? And in this segregation that was happening all around our country. And now here we are again in this part of the spiral where we're taking a look at where we are collectively healing this sickness and burden of racism in a deeper way, except this time, right? It's not just in our laws, it's in our systems, it's in our institutions, it's in education, it's in healthcare, and maybe most deeply and powerfully what I'm saying is it's also happening within ourselves, right? The way that racism has covertly made its way into each one of us. And I'm so proud to be part of a church where we're doing this healing work together. And I see people from all around in every circle of my life that is being brave enough to take a look at that healing and how that has shown up within themselves. Right? This pandemic has done an incredibly amazing thing. It has connected us all in this really powerful way. As isolated as it can feel, there's this collective consciousness that I really see is happening right now. And it's a healing that I believe that is here for a deeper transformation for all of us as we grieve together, as we take care of our neighbor by wearing a mask, as we just think about the whole. There is a deep transformation that is taking place. And so as I had to learn how to fight for the best in myself when I first took those classes, today we are learning how to collectively fight for the best of ourselves together. And we realize as we stand for Black lives right now, like we're standing for this deeper transformation within ourselves. It's spiritual work. It's healing work when we take that stand. I want to close with some words by Patrisse Cullors, who is one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. And this is what she says when she talks about this work and taking part in this work. She says, "You see the light that comes inside of people to other communities that are like, I'm going to stand on the side of Black lives. You see people literally transforming. And that's a different type of work. And for me, that's spiritual work. It's a healing work, and human to human. If you take a moment to be with somebody, to understand the pains they're going through, you get to transform yourself." So we're all being transformed right now. Today is Pride. I know there's virtual Pride events happening all around the world, and I would ask us to remember that Pride also started in a protest. Pride also started in an enough is enough moment. Pride began from a place that said, my dignity shall stand, right? And it took people buying into a greater story, buying into the dignity of all human beings, and believing that above all else, and knowing that love is at the center of who we are. And so how do we make this love more visible? So that's what we're up to, y'all. We're just making love more visible right now. And so I thank each one of you that are a part of that healing that's happening. And I know that we are all part of this greater healing that's happening together.